Well, for a bonus footage on the Son House lesson, I thought it'd be nice to ask Stefan Grossman some questions, seeing as he recorded with Son House and spent quite a bit of time with him. And so that is what we're going to do. And we got Mr. Stefan Grossman here. And the first question being, when did you first hear Son House's music?
I think it was probably when I was 17 years old. I got very involved into trying to listen to as many old blues records as I could. The problem at that time was very few old 78s had been reissued. The Origin of Jazz Library had come out with an LP called Mississippi Blues and one called Really the Country Blues. And on, I believe, the Mississippi Blues LP, there was My Black Mama and Preaching the Blues. I eventually, in that year, because I was friends with the people who were involved in the Origin of Jazz Library, actually went to the house of the fellow, the collector, who actually had the old 78s and listened to them. And for the collectors, they were more involved in the rarity of the record, though they would say also how great Son House was, but to them, Charlie Patton was the be-all of end-all of everything. But for me, listening to Son House, I was fascinated initially because he had set arrangements, and against this was this powerful voice, an absolute powerhouse. Then the Library of Congress recordings from 1942 were released, and there were many, many more tunes. And those tunes also offered a wider variety from his repertoire, from right or wrong, from blues with or without the bottleneck, him singing with Willie Brown in sort of a without instruments. And again, I thought this just an amazing artist, an absolutely amazing artist. But you have to remember at that time, the only 78s were Preaching the Blues, Walking My Black Mama, and then Dry Spell Blues was found.
Oh, sure.
And that was really such a strange record to hear, because the riff that he's playing on Bottleneck, again, is a set arrangement, and over that he's just singing away, and it impressed me immensely.
Right. What? So you were 17. So that was before you had started taking lessons from Gary Davis, or was that during?
I was during taking lessons with Gary Davis. I would cheat, as he would say, and I would listen to other musicians. You know, as far as Reverend Davis was concerned, the only musicians that were great musicians that I should listen to was himself, of course, Blind Blake, Lonnie Johnson, and Buddy Morse for some reason. And whenever I took, for instance, when I took up a recording of Bucka White doing Panama Limited, the first thing Reverend Davis said was, "Oh, he's using a slide, a bottleneck, that's cheating."
Sure.
And so then I said to Reverend Davis, something I used to say to him quite often, I would say, "Well, you can't do it," sort of as a joke. And then out came a tube, a White Owl cigar tube, and he started playing Whistling Blues, which was, Reverend Davis could always go one step ahead.
Sure. When did, so fast forward to the rediscovery, did you hear about the rediscovery, or did you see him, Son House, first, or how did that,
well, I was very
seeing him or meeting him?
I was very close friends with Nick Pearls.
Sure.
And so Nick Pearls and Phil Spiro, I knew that they were going to go down to Mississippi to try to find Son House, because at the same time, Mississippi John Hurt had been rediscovered by another friend, Tom Hoskins. And Nick went down with Phil as well as Dick Waterman. What was really strange was that no one thought to ask Alan Lomax where Son House might be.
Sure.
No?
Yeah.
Nobody, it's just when you think back at it, because Alan Lomax knew that Son was living in Rochester, New York. So Nick and the fellas, with their Volkswagen, they went down to Mississippi, and then they eventually followed clues and ended up in Rochester.
Wow.
And I actually have the photographs that Nick took when they first knocked at the door and found Son House.
Wow. So when was the first time did you meet him, like at a performance, or did you see him perform live before you met him, or how did you meeting? Yeah. I know you obviously were friends with them, but did you meet him after he was performing in the city, or?
He came down to New York City with Dick Waterman to perform at the Gaslight.
Sure.
So I met Son and Dick before the performance, and
Okay.
to me it was like, meeting,
Right.
beyond a legend. And Son didn't have a guitar really to play, and I had a National, and I gave him the National. I said, "It's yours, Son." And then an hour or two later, he was on stage at the Gaslight, and it was crowded. The Gaslight Club was crowded, and it was an amazing experience because Son was a handsome man, a very handsome man, and skinny.
Right.
But when he walked, he seemed like he was frail, and he walked up on stage, meandered on almost with this heavy National guitar he was holding. He then put the guitar in his lap, and the audience, you could see, were thinking,
Is he going to be able to do it?
yeah, is what's going to happen. And then he took his slide and he slid it down to the 12th fret. He was in open G.
Yeah.
Okay? His head whipped back. All you could see were the whites of his eyes. Then he started, before singing lyrics, just to hum. And the whole audience just stood up as if someone from Mars had landed.
Sure,
They had never, ever witnessed such intensity. And then he started to sing, and everyone was just completely without words. It just,
I bet.
The power of how Son was playing was, we just had never experienced anything like it. We had experienced Reverend Gary Davis, we had seen Mississippi John Hurt, but to see someone who could just take one guitar and his voice was the most amazing instrument. His guitar playing wasn't as precise as it was in 1931 recordings or the 1942 recordings, but that was almost secondary. It was the actual complete package that he was putting together.
Sure.
And you wonder now, at least I wonder in retrospect, how strange it must have seemed to him. Here was a man who had played in juke joints, sang in the church down in Mississippi. He stopped playing when Willie Brown passed away. They both worked for the railroads. And all of a sudden, he's being thrown into an audience that adores him.
Right.
Absolutely adores him. He doesn't even have to prove himself, and they're all white.
Right.
And they're all 20 years old. I mean, how strange.
Oh, it must have been very strange. Yeah.
I never talked to him about that. I don't think anyone else did, because we were just so naive and sort of.
No, I've often wondered that too, as a listener, listening to the live recordings of, John Hurt and all those guys, that I wonder what it was like for them. Like, as you just said, they're kind of transplanted into this stage where all these people are, and they're playing, and all of a sudden there's this thunderous applause. I always wondered, what that must have been like for them to go from, nothing to all of a sudden you're adored.
And also, we would start to interview him, talk with him,
Sure.
Spend time with him. I spent one evening, we were drinking, and I put the tape machine on, and this was like 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yep.
And he started, out came tunes that he usually didn't play. And talking to him about Charlie Patton, because again, Charlie Patton was a hero to us.
Oh, absolutely.
But to Son, Charlie was a joker.
Oh, really?
He joked around. He wasn't a great musician.
Sure.
He knew a lot of tricks on the guitar. And of course, everyone was asking about Robert Johnson.
Right.
And to Son, Robert was, a kid who played harmonica, sat at his feet, then went away, came back and played good.
Right.
But all this
The
clamor,
hype,
or
right.
well, whether it's hype or clamor, whatever, about Robert Johnson, can you imagine? I can't imagine how Son could have put that all together in his mind.
Sure. Wow. So, talking about recording him, you actually got to record with him,
Right.
right? With Yonder Comes the Blues and New Pony Blues,
Yeah.
right?
But
And
what
so
happened?
How did that happen?
Well, I was in England, and Dick came over with Son as well as Skip, but he came to the studio, Sound Technique studio in London, and I was recording an album, and they were there just to say hello.
Oh, nice.
And then I said, "Hey, Son, do you want to, do a couple of numbers?" And he said, "Sure." And he went down into the sound room, and I think he was relieved because he didn't have to play guitar.
Oh, sure.
So I just pretended to put like the persona of Willie Brown, and I started to play a blues in A, and Son just went right
went
into
for
it. And then with Pony Blues, it was interesting. Of course, I started off trying to play it like Patton, but then as he started to sing it, you could see that he had a little different version.
Yeah.
So then I started to change my version to fit his vocals. And they're really, for me, they're precious recordings in my career.
Absolutely. If he had any or said anything, did he have any opinion about what you were playing, or he just sang and he was fine with whatever you did?
Just fine. It was just like, when in Rome, do Rome.
Sure.
He was just having fun. And I remember then that night, they were playing at the Odeon Hammersmith in London, and I was backstage with Son and Skip, and then some of our rock and roll friends came in. Eric Clapton came in to say hello, and it was a big deal. These were,
sure.
Skip, and the difference between Skip and Son was that Skip, some of the magic had sort of left his music, whereas with Son, some of the precision, but not the magic.
Right. Did Son House ever mention where he learned how to play, or anything?
I think
of that
one
nature?
of the names that came up was Rube Lacey. Rube Lacey was a real important musician in the Delta at the time, and older than Son, though Rube Lacey only recorded a couple of old records.
Right.
And also he admired greatly Willie Brown, because Willie
sure.
Brown was his best friend, and they played together. And so they were the best friends, and his relationship that he knew Patton was only because Willie Brown played with Patton as well.
Okay. And you had mentioned before the taping that Son House actually met your parents.
Well, that was funny. I was going to Cooper Union School of Architecture, and Ed Denson, who was again another member of this, what we called the Blues Mafia in those days, he was on tour with Mississippi John Hurt, Son House, and Skip James. And they were coming into New York City for some reason, like at 2 o'clock in the morning. So Ed asked me if I could pick him up and we could go to my parents' house on Gramercy Park and just hang out. And in the morning, like at 6 or 7, John Hurt, Skip, and Son, they would have to leave. They did leave. My parents, when I got back from school, my mother and father said, we have no problem that you had, black musicians in the house. No problem at all. But Son was singing all night. He was like humming, moaning. We have no problem with that he kept us up. We have no problem that he drank everything that we had in the liquor cabinet. We have no liquor anymore. But he was smoking and he burnt a hole in the rug. So me being a wise ass, I said, well, you shouldn't have a rug.
Right.
So that was
nice.
The encounter.
Wow. So that must have been interesting for them to have him stay. I mean, as you said, they didn't have a problem with it. But did they ever say anything later that was, like, anything that was...
No problem. My parents were incredibly supportive. Reverend Davis used to come quite a bit to the house. And I spent quite a bit of time with Reverend Davis. And I think their hope was that all this was my focusing on music, and most of it was black music, black guitar playing, was just going to be a passing phase in my life, and I'd become an architect. I fooled them.
Yeah. Is there, kind of coming to a close, is there any, or final thoughts, number one, and number two, is there any... there's so many opinions about Son House, and is there anything that maybe you feel is said of him that's maybe not true or misrepresenting him, or anything
well,
like that?
Well, it is true that Son was an alcoholic.
Sure.
So what was very important to the people around him that really admired him was to make sure these other white kids who were trying to be hip or trying to be in with it would stop them at the door with their pints of whiskey. Okay. Because if Son got his pints of whiskey, sure enough, he'd be a drunkard, and he would, and unfortunately, wouldn't be able to play guitar very well.
Sure.
So the reputation that, yes, he had an alcohol problem was definitely true, but it was also, his performances really depended on whether he just had one little drink or he got 2 bottles.
Right.
So that was an interesting sort of period in that the the blues mafia, let's call them that, tried to protect these people
Right.
from the hordes that just wanted to be, let's call them hanger-ons.
Right,
You know,
sure.
because we thought the music was just so important. And Son would show me, how to play different licks, and he would show me. He again didn't have the precision up, but there were certain chords he would use that,
Right.
after all my transcribing of music, I would have never guessed that
Right.
at all. And it was very important to see how he attacked the guitar.
Oh,
When
absolutely.
you see him on video, he doesn't hold back.
Oh, no,
He just
not
goes
at
right
all.
into it, and you pity the poor guitar.
Well, it's definitely helpful because that you helped with the lesson so much by saying that's not how he played it. And because for me, I would just listen to the recordings or watch the, with what footage we had to use those for the lesson. Most of it was the recordings, and of course, I just go by ear and say, well, this is, I guess, how I would go about it. And then you would be able to say, like, no, that's not how it's done.
Well, but you did incredibly well, because there's, for instance, Preachin' Blues.
Right.
That bass riff.
Right.
Is and you got it.
Sure.
You got it.
Lucky enough.
And Mississippi County Farm Blues, again, that bass riff was so strange.
Right.
And you seem to, you got it.
Well, I got it because of your
Well,
instruction.
that when we worked together,
We
but
did.
Preaching Blues, boy, you got that by yourself. And I've never heard anyone else be able to duplicate that.
Oh.
And a lot of times transcribing old blues, the logical, easy way is usually the way that
is being played. Sure.
played. And again, we know after a while that you sort of understand Son House's music. So you have,
Right.
he plays in open G, he plays in regular tuning, he plays in open D, whether those tunings are tuned up or down. And then all of a sudden in 2005, they find an old 78 of Son House with Clarksdale Moan.
Right.
And you listen to it and you say, what tuning is he playing in?
Right.
Oh, it must be an open D or open E. And then you realize, no, it's not. Then all of a sudden, this cross note.
Right.
And you think, I thought I knew what this guy was doing.
Because that was another one that we both worked back and forth
Well, a lot
saying,
of, yeah.
like, one of us has got to figure this out. And
And
fortunately, we did.
And again, another one of these incredible pieces that he has a riff, an arrangement, a set arrangement, and over that, the improvisation really comes with his vocal. That he just is singing so strong and so heavy above that arrangement. That makes his music very unique.
Absolutely. Well, is there any final things you would like to say, or have you said it all?
Who makes your shirts?
Who makes your shirts?
Oh, Jam's World. Who makes yours?
This is a Rock Mount shirt from Denver, Colorado.
Okay, well, I always remember that Brownie McGee said, whenever you're on stage, you have to wear things that are bright.
Bright. Well, I don't know if this would be bright or flashy.
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 It's flashy.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for
My pleasure.
answering my questions, and I think everyone will really enjoy hearing your thoughts.
Okay, and we put on, I think the DVD will put on the bonus tracks with the audio tracks
with
of
the-
Son playing,
Yep.
the two tracks that I recorded.
The
with him.
Yonder Comes the Blues and New Pony Blues.
Yep. Great.
All right. Well, so long.
Thank you. Okay.